everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host for today, Taylor Rockwell. Once again, Daryl Grove is resting at home, is out of the hospital, should be back and on the show Friday. We'll be doing some listener questions. We'll be doing Richmond Kickers Weekly. Lots of content coming out, which will feature Daryl Grove. But until then, I'm going to be talking to Pablo Mar of The Athletic. Pablo is a person we've wanted to have on the show for a good long while. He came down to Richmond this past weekend for the Richmond Kickers Ford Madison game. We got to talking. We got to hanging out. Lots of great people were in town. And it was a good reminder that, again, we really wanted to have Pablo on because he brings a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, but he's also not afraid to kind of articulate his perspective and his opinion. And that was a thing I really wanted because I wanted to get into sort of deeper levels about how MLS players interact on social media and the kind of repercussions of that. But then also looking at the situation with the Iron Front and how Major League Soccer has dealt with that, how it might end up working out or not working out. Pablo has some thoughts on that. But then we get into Major League Soccer in general, looking at DC United to start, but then sort of the teams that Pablo has enjoyed the most, how he thinks the season could play out. Lots of great varying conversations in there. And also a little bit about kind of his experiences as a journalist, like hearing from angry coaches and front office people versus hearing nice things from coaches and front office people. He's had both of those, I would say. So I will stop with that, other than to say that I really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciated Pablo's kind of candid response to some difficult questions and some difficult topics, and I hope you all will as well. I should add, because we're talking about Iron Front, because we're talking about MLS players on social media, we're probably also going to be talking about some things that some people may not enjoy, and so I'm just going to kind of throw that in as a disclaimer that I think Pablo and I would both say that we're admittedly left-leaning. I genuinely don't think that has a massive impact on this conversation because I think we tried to stick to the story itself and what has happened and what may happen from here. But if you maybe are not going to look forward to the perspectives of two people from that perspective, then I would just say maybe this episode is not for you. I hope you'll still listen. But I say that to say that if this stokes your outrage, then that is not what we were going for, and maybe that's on you. But we shall see. I'll let you be the judge of that one. If you're still listening, then thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Joining me now, making his, I believe, TSS debut, it's Mr. Pablo Mar of The Athletic. Pablo, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I was a guest on the live show with the Cooligans, so it doesn't count. I don't know. It was a hybrid kind of event, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point. That is the new tradition. Is I say it's a person's first time, and then they remind me of a time they were on the show 6 years ago. So yes, I'm glad that you could do that. I'm glad we got to hang out this weekend. You came down for the Richmond Ford Madison game. Do you feel like you went full Mingo this past weekend, or was it more of a partial Mingo situation for you?
Yeah, I think it was a partial Mingo. Mostly just ended up drinking beers and talking to you and some other folks. Although I did walk away with a free jersey, which certainly, yeah, sure, I went full Mingo. Why not?
Did you reconsider that because you remember the jersey and then you remember that they sized it correctly? Is that when it became full Mingo status?
I did, yeah. You could probably hear it just in my brain right then when I was like, oh, wait, they gave me something. Yeah, full Mingo for sure. Yeah.
Well, so I want to start there. It seems like this is a thing you enjoy doing. You do somewhat regularly, at least once a season, I think is what you tweeted. Why do you enjoy making these sort of road trips to see lower league soccer?
I mean, I started covering soccer, obviously, because I love the game, and I grew up a soccer fan, grew up in Spain. And, since I started doing it, at first on the side, freelancing, and now full-time, much of that romance obviously disappears. It's sort of like once you see how the sausage is made kind of thing, you don't want to eat it anymore. So, at least once a year, it's good to sort of free yourself of any kind of professional responsibilities to a game and just drive somewhere and just go watch a match, like I used to, 10, 15 years ago when I enjoyed doing that. I think certainly USL is a little bit more well cut out for that because I don't cover USL a ton, and I have professional obligation to cover everybody in MLS objectively, that sort of stuff. So it's good just to go and chill and drink a beer, eat a slice of pizza, and watch soccer. Kind of remind myself why I got into it.
And you have been writing quite a bit for The Athletic, obviously, ranging from some pop culture pieces. Was it all the times MLS has appeared in pop culture? Was that one of them?
Definitely not all the times, but it was the 10.
There it is.
Still tongue in cheek, obviously, but it was like the 10 most notable times, which it's a short list. I mean, MLS has not really thrust itself into the public consciousness on any regular basis, but yeah, no, I definitely enjoy doing sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of pieces like that.
So you do those
more serious stuff.
Yeah, that's I was going to ask you about that next, because I enjoyed that one, but I also enjoyed the piece on athletes like kind of choosing to speak out on social media when they choose to, how they choose to, and the backlash they may face. What made you want to explore that idea?
I don't know. I think it's fascinating. It's like a pretty nuanced thing. I mean, the idea popped into my head after I was there covering the game that where Bedoya went off into a field side microphone. He had been tweeting pretty loudly, I guess, in the days building up to that. And I've always just been fascinated by what makes an athlete choose to speak up on an issue like that. Because I mean, the vast majority, 85, 90%, really more, 95% probably of MLS guys just use their social to throw up kind of boilerplate tweets about the team or games, or offer somebody a little bit of insight into their personal life. Whereas guys like Bedoya, Brad Evans, Sasha Question, those guys go sort of ham on their Twitter about political issues. So it's always been kind of fascinating to me. I do think there's something to be said. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a study on this. I think it'd be pretty hard to prove, but I do generally think that MLS skews to the left, both as far as its player base goes and also its fan base goes. So, the other thing that's worth noting is it's not like the riskiest move to tweet about that stuff. I think even Brad Evans said, yeah, it's very rare that I'll get, some loud, obnoxious person disagreeing with one of those tweets in my mentions. Typically the people that follow those players know what they're about and are prepared for that sort of stuff. But that to me is an interesting dynamic too. Mm-hmm. But strangely enough, I try to get a hold of a few players, current and former, that I'd noticed that I either like heard they were sort of right leaning, or I'd noticed them occasionally tweeting kind of right leaning stuff, and the ones that responded, they didn't want to talk to the piece. I think one of them just straight up said, I like my job. So I think even they might realize that if they tweet something like that out, they're tweeting it out into like a very left wing progressive sort of fan base that's just going to tear them apart for it.
So they don't maybe face too much of a backlash. It did seem like you sort of faced a little bit of one, not surprisingly, in the comment section. That's where those things happen. There was like a lot of the comments not necessarily worth going into, but one sort of consistent refrain I saw was the idea that like we want athletes to speak out when we agree with them or when they're popular opinions, but not when we don't. And yeah, you mentioned into those right-leaning players. What do you make of that argument?
I mean, I think it's sort of bullshit when people are like, I don't know about everybody else. I don't feel the need to create like a safe space for somebody with, just use abortion as an example. If somebody is quote unquote pro-life or doesn't believe in a woman's right to just make healthcare decisions about her own body, like I don't like. Obviously, that person is going to get shouted down. That has nothing to do to me with like. Twitter, MLS Twitter being this like liberal thought bubble. That to me has to do more with the fact that like America as a whole, especially the sort of like 18 to 34-year-old demographic, college educated, like the people that MLS are sort of like marketing to, like the majority of those people are pro-choice and like have progressive views, so when someone's like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure more players would like voice their anti-gun control beliefs if people were tolerant of those views. I mean, who's going to be tolerant of those views? Like now, like that being said, I mean, like I guess if a player wanted to express some sort of like, his views on economic policy or foreign diplomacy, whatever, that were like a little more right-leaning, I mean, maybe I would be more inclined to be like, oh, okay, well, that person should definitely be able to sort of have a venue to speak their mind without getting shouted down. But no, I mean, I'm completely thrilled to see people's ignorant views getting shouted down on Twitter when they're like when they're truly sort of like a danger to public safety and just human rights issues. You know?
So you mentioned earlier, like Major League Soccer kind of targets the 18 to 34 demographic. You feel like it's a little bit more left-leaning, which makes it, to me, all the more surprising that things have gone the way they have when it comes to the Iron Front flag. Have you been surprised by MLS sort of pursuing the route that they've taken?
No. I wish I could say that I was surprised, but I think they tend to try and be hands-off with this sort of stuff and like not make anybody angry. They could probably take a lesson from other companies that have just openly sided with progressive causes and ended up making more money because of that. That does confuse me. I'm like, well, it seems even like the smart business decision here is to just be like, yes, you can express yourself freely in the stadium. So no, I'm not surprised. Even I think though that like that issue, there are like nuances that people aren't talking about. Obviously Twitter, MLS Twitter, Eddie Twitter is like a really polarized place. And I think that's a complicated issue. But am I surprised that MLS hasn't like been really proactive about, allowing supporters to display what they consider political symbols? No, not at all.
Do you feel like talking about some of those nuances here? Because I would like to know like what you think maybe is getting missed in some of the conversation.
I don't know. I think like when I sort of look at the issue as a whole, first of all, I completely think that any supporter, any supporters group should be able to use that Iron Front symbol. I think it's like ridiculous that this is even an issue. What I will say though is, I think it is maybe MLS supporters do have this luxury, and I would call it a luxury of living in this sort of with this sort of liberal fan base, which is something that I love about MLS, to be clear. But at the same time, I think it's easy to say, we should all have the right to express ourselves freely. Well, I don't know, man. I'm not sure I want to go to a game and like see like a Make America Great Again banner at a game. And when you talk to any number of supporters about what they would do in that situation, it's always like, well, we sort of self-regulate that, or that person would be, shouted down or sort of ostracized. And to me, I do sometimes think that sounds like an invitation to like a confrontation, possibly a violent one. So I guess what I'm saying is, I obviously, I tend to agree with where all these supporters groups are coming from. And I definitely commend, ECS, Timbers Army, all these groups that are really putting their money where their mouth is and walking out, not showing up, that sort of stuff. I just think that maybe like there needs to be a more thought out plan for what happens if you do end up with, like if the majority then ends up facing, a minority that's displaying something truly objectionable. I don't know if like self-regulating is really the answer there. That just seems like sketchy to me. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally do. And like I'll apologize in advance if this becomes a rambling sort of monologue. But like that's the thing that I have struggled with a little bit, because on the one hand, we have had people respond to me and Daryl talking about this by saying like, Iron Front is like this very leftist, very violent organization. Like obviously that's not true. And I do think that it's sort of, there has been a move to paint it as this like far left, violent, like oppositional group when they are not. But I think that has been done in order to make it seem like this is obviously a thing that shouldn't be there, whereas I do think it's more nuanced. But I also think that your perspective is accurate. I agree with that entirely, and it's a thing that I've wondered is like my dad asked me, like, well, what's going on with the Iron Front thing? Like, what happens if they fly like a really conservative thing? And I don't have an answer to that, because I think you're absolutely right that it's like, it's not, I don't have any objection to the Iron Front flag, but like, personally speaking, I would not want to see a MAGA flag. And I think that is what makes it hard for me, is like, I understand why I think it should be allowed to fly and why it shouldn't be an issue. But then at the same time, I do sort of see, if you then put yourself in the like conservative perspective, why you wouldn't want to see certain flags being flown. But that's when it comes down to, for me, Adam Snavely, our friend, wrote a good piece for The Athletic, kind of going through the history of the Iron Front and how like this flag's actually been flown since like 2017, I think was his point. And like it's only now been brought to the attention. And I think that's where MLS has really made a dramatic misstep, is that I didn't know what that was until this started happening. And it feels like they brought attention to it to then have to deal with it, whereas there are other ways that they could have dealt with it a bit more discreetly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when I do think about, like, you use the example of a MAGA flag, and, there is part of me in my head that's like, that would never happen.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there's, like, actual Nazis in MLS stadiums. You know what I mean? So
I should laugh, but yes, I take your point.
Yeah, and, there are segments of fan bases. What I've found generally is that MLS fan bases are relatively representative of the communities that they're in, and, like, there are certain fan bases, I'm not going to go into it, that, like, their fans, maybe their and owners' views are a little more regressive than other clubs, and so, like, I don't know, man. Like, I could see something like that happening, and I just think to myself, all right, what happens in that case? And I guess the realistic answer is, then you would probably have a bunch of supporters shouting at that person, or, like, forcing them out of the stadium or something like that, and it just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I don't have the answer then.
Yeah.
It's like so complicated, and I'm really, really relieved to see that, like, the ISC and MLS and, like, all these groups are getting together and figuring it out, because it really is going to take, like, a collective sort of group kind of thought process to wade through this. It's just more complicated than people are making it sound, So,
mm-hmm.
like, I'm happy that it seems like people are putting their heads together.
Yeah, I mean, I still think I take a more of an approach of, like, I forget what Supreme Court justice it was who, like, delivered the majority opinion on, like, pornography and the idea of, like, I know it when I see it. And I guess that's kind of how I feel. Is like, if I see a thing that is overtly political, I know it's overtly political. To me, the iron front symbol was not even a political thing, because I didn't really know what it was. I feel like the majority of people didn't know what it was until it was made clear that it was a political symbol. And I think maybe that, for me, is where that line is a little bit. But to your point, that's why I'm happy I'm not kind of in charge of figuring all this out, because that, again, requires a lot of nuance and probably is, like, biased in one way and not the other. And I do think it makes it that much harder to discuss and figure out. I don't really know where we go from here, because it doesn't feel like the fans are going to stop flying the banners and stop having the protests. And thus far, it seems like Major League Soccer is okay with continuing on the path they've been pursuing. So, I mean, I don't really want to ask you, like, go ahead.
I think it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, apparently. I don't know. We get, like, Justice, I think it was Potter Stewart was the
Thank you.
You're talking
yes,
about.
It was.
I think he's been dead for 30 or 40 years. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's going to conclude. One thing I would say is, like, I just think that if fans really genuinely want to affect change, and I know this is, like, a huge sacrifice for fans and communities where they waited, like, 5 years to even get season tickets because some of these teams are so popular, but, like, they have to, like, en masse stop showing up. I mean, they have to leave supporter sections empty. Like, it's generally my attitude about affecting any kind of change in this country is, your most powerful weapon is your wallet, like, hit these dudes where it hurts, like, embarrass them publicly. I mean, you want to watch a Timbers game? As far as the television product goes, to me, the best TV product in MLS is any game at Providence Park, right? Because, like, just you feel the atmosphere and the fans are so crazy, and to watch one of those games with a completely empty supporters section, assuming the Timbers wouldn't have the gall to, like, fill those seats with just GA tickets or something. That to me would be impactful, and again, like, I respect the measures that they have taken, and I think maybe eventually it will get there. But no, I mean, I think the fans should keep at it. I admire this tremendously, what they're doing. So
yeah, I think you tweeted. Was it you who's tweeting about how, like, when ECS left, that it was, like, a very quiet atmosphere then on in the Seattle game?
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like a morgue. That's another stadium where it's like the fans make the TV product, and, like, just to watch that game, it just sounded like a game at Gillette Stadium or something like that, So no, I mean, I think they have all the control at the end of the day.
Much more still to come from my conversation with Mr. Pablo Maurer, but first I wanted to let you know that today's episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by our friends over at Feels. Are you an MLS executive who maybe thought you could exert your authority and get the fans to do exactly what you wanted, but then slowly found out that maybe that wasn't going to be the case, and now you're panicked and anxious and nervous about what's to come? Then maybe you should try Feels. Their premium CBD will keep your head clear and help you feel your best so that you can sort of deal with the self-inflicted dumpster fire that now exists. CBD has been proven to greatly reduce anxiety, pain, and sleeplessness, but it is the case that navigating the world of CBD can be complicated. You might see it like in a grocery store or in a gas station or something like that. At Feels, they make the process as simple as possible so you can start feeling better sooner. But if you're unfamiliar with CBD, essentially it comes in like a little dropper with a glass bottle. You place a few drops of Feels under your tongue. You feel the difference within minutes, but it naturally helps reduce stress, anxiety, pain, sleeplessness, as I said. But the biggest thing is that there is no risk of a high or hangover or addiction, anything like that. So you can just feel better and get back to running your league without creating massively distracting sideshows that cause immense problems when it comes to public relations. So if you would like to try Feels and not have to deal with that anxiety and sleeplessness, then you can become a member today by going to feels.com/TSS, and you'll get 50% off your order with free shipping. That's FEALS.com/TSS to become a member and get 50% automatically taken off your first order with free shipping. Once again, that's feels.com/TSS. Thank you very much to Feels for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to my chat with Pablo Mar. Well, so I don't want to just ask you complicated social questions. I also want to ask you complicated journalistic questions. Because I am not a journalist. I would like to say that up front. But I am like sort of fascinated by how journalists operate and what their experiences are like. And like for you, like this came to mind because I was reading your piece about Audi Field and kind of like some of the construction problems that have happened. Taylor Twellman, I think almost being burned alive by the sun was in there. And I'm wondering, like when you write that sort of piece, do you hear back from the front office? Do you hear from people at DC United being like, come on, man, like, oh, this isn't the case? Or like, oh, like, but we're doing this. Like, do you get a sort of backlash when you write things that are critical of organizations?
I mean, look, I don't act to be the world's greatest journalist, but I would say if I have like one or, 3 or 4 rules, and one of them is definitely to treat any subjects 100% fairly. And that a lot of times that means giving them every opportunity to respond to anything in a piece. And I definitely do that with DC United. I mean, that piece, it took me probably a day and a half to work through them on, hey, well, this is what I found, and what's your response to this? I mean, that's one reason I ended up getting, I think, Andy Bush, the CFO, for that piece was, the team obviously felt the need to put their, I'll just say give their take on things, or sort of like provide, information to inform some of the information that I reported. I mean, if the question is like, do people get pissed off? Yes. I mean, all the time. That would be like, it's cliche, but it's definitely an indicator that you're doing your job right. Mm-hmm. But I've found that like, there's just only so angry someone can get at you if you report on something objectively, you're reporting sound, and you just lay facts out there. I mean, there was one piece where it was like, maybe 2 months before the stadium opened, I reported on the Sun thing. I had a source. I got a hold of a Sun study that the ESPN had commissioned about the stadium, and I wrote a long piece for an outlet down here, DCist, that kind of laid out all the issues with the stadium, issues with, getting fans in promptly, the roof, issues with maybe the front office being understaffed. And yeah, that really, really upsets people. Even though they were given the opportunity, it was still, pretty uncomfortable to deal with. But it's my job to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Plus, there's if you want to keep it with DC United, there's other stories that I've written about them that are incredibly positive, because they are doing some things right. They do have decent people working for the team, and there are definitely good stories to be told, and I'm always happy to tell those stories. But I'm usually happier to write something interesting.
All right, well, let's keep going with DC then for a minute. Wayne Rooney's gotten a lot of attention since he announced he was leaving DC early to become player coach of Derby County. He's been accused of being checked out. That's been kind of talked about at length. My question is, it feels to me like he's been more outspoken and more kind of open about his feelings about the league. He came out yesterday talking about how players need more money. He's had issues with charter flights and officiating. Do you think he started to get more outspoken as he's kind of come to the end of his time in Major League Soccer?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he's. Look, Wayne is. If you're around the team frequently, it's not hard to see. He is an ideal teammate off the field. I mean, he is very close to probably 50% of that locker room. He's close to a lot of the guys that are the union reps. for DC United. And I have no doubt that one of those guys, kind of got in his ear a little bit and said, "Hey, dude, you don't have to worry about pissing anybody off. At some point, you should, start throwing a couple Molotovs or whatever." And so, yeah, no, I definitely feel he's been more outspoken. And he has a huge platform. He has 17 million Twitter followers or something like that, so it's been good to see that, I imagine he'll continue. As far as him being tuned out, yeah, it's been, I guess it's been tough to watch occasionally just because he missed that spat of games with red card suspensions, with, missing a game to deal with his family issues abroad, illness, another game. But I generally have the attitude about Wayne, and this actually goes for probably most high-level DPs, that you don't get to that point in your career by being able to just be like, okay, well, I'm out of here, so I'm just going to, clock in and put in a shift and clock out. It's just not the way his brain works, not the way his brain works in training, not the way his brain works in games. And, of course, every now and then you get like a Steven Gerrard or something like that really is here just to knock the ball around. But Rooney is not that person, I think I put a cap on that by saying that, he did, he's had his struggles here sort of in the summer lull that United's gone through, but every single person on that team has. I mean, Lucho, even a player like Pauliola, who's been really their most consistent performer, I think, for 2 years. He's struggled. All these guys have struggled. So I think it's just sort of speaks to the general state of United than just Wayne.
So I want to get to Acosta in a second, but I had one more question about Rooney, because with everything you've said of him being a good professional, a good teammate, he has a lot of respect in the locker room. How do you think he'll do as a player manager or just as a manager? I feel like player manager is always a pretty difficult task, but in management, do you think he'll do okay?
I do. I think even the player manager thing, a lot of people might not realize, he already is kind of a player manager. He does have a strong influence, on Ben, Nolan Sheldon as assistant coach, in trainings. He's very vocal on the field. I mean, his teammates will tell you that he regularly gives kind of instructions or will report instructions back to the bench during games. And Wayne, I think, the reputation he's earned over the years has been this sort of hardworking, tough-nosed player. I think maybe he's sort of fits the stereotype that most people would apply to English soccer players. But actually a very smart guy, and actually has a higher degree of tactical understanding of what's going on in the field than anybody else on that team by a good margin, So yeah, and I also think he's the right age. It's going to sound sort of strange, but I had a conversation with Ben Olsen about this last year, because Ben is part of the sort of last generation of players where you came up in these sort of no bullshit locker rooms. Jim Curtin's another good example. I sat down with him a couple months ago, and he said, when I played for the Fire, back in the late to the mid 2005, 2007, 9, whatever, he was like, I would never dream of walking into Bob Bradley's office and talking to the guy about some issue I had, and he was like, now obviously there are kids in my office every day that need constant sort of feedback, and I think Wayne is at a good age to where he's sort of experienced both. I think he can give certain players a kick in the ass if that's what they need, but on the other hand, he understands how to deal with players his age and players who are younger than him, who you need to be more instructive and maybe a little bit softer in your tone to them, so I think he's really, really well equipped. Honestly, it didn't surprise me at all when I heard he was going to go into management. I didn't think it would be this soon, but yeah, I think he'll do well. We'll just have to wait and see.
And then one more DC question for you. It is about Luciano Acosta. He's only started 2 games. He started 2 games in July, I think 2 games in August, none in September, mostly substitute appearances. Do you have an idea what has happened there?
I mean, a couple things. I think Lucho and he would admit that he's not had his best year. Obviously been dealing with a lot since, the move to PSG fell through, and just some other things, but also, this is me speculating, Taylor, but like, I think there's something about the American soccer fan and soccer coach that sees a player during the run of play walking and is just like, no, that's lazy. You have to be running at all times. It sort of cracks me up because, Johan Cruyff played for the Washington Diplomats here in DC. So you're talking about like the greatest midfielder ever to play the game. For my money, maybe the greatest player in history. And
who hated running.
You read the Washington Post coverage of him at the time, and they say, like, why isn't he running? And it's like, this is a dude who has a bigger soccer brain. His brain should be like preserved in formaldehyde in some institution, So I think players like Leo Hara, Lynn O'Hara is another guy who's sort of fallen into the doghouse as the year has worn on. I do think they suffer from maybe that perception, both from fans and sometimes from the coaching staff, where it's like they want them to quote unquote try harder, something like that. It's not that they're not trying. I mean, a lot of times it makes sense to watch. You know what I mean? Like, but like I said, I think it's a distinctly American thing where it's like, oh, that guy's lazy. That isn't the case. So I do think that some of that has kind of bled onto Lucho as well. One thing I'll say is, it's purely my opinion, just from having watched all their games this year, you have to get them on the field. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, man. Like, if your attitude and Ben's not the only, many MLS coaches use a refrain, oh, you have to have your best 11 players in the field. I'm just trying to put my best 11 players out there. There is no way that you can tell me in any given circumstance that Acosta isn't a better player than any number of people on the field who are playing in the positions that he can play in. And he's also that sort of, kind of mercurial player that's capable of these sort of moments of magic where he can, have drifted in and out of the game, and then all of a sudden just he turns it on and has some crazy moments. So I don't anticipate that Ben's going to start starting him anytime soon. I do think it's a mistake not to, but then again, I don't get paid to coach a soccer team, so who knows?
So DC maybe have not always been so entertaining this season. Who have been your favorite teams to watch for whatever reason?
Ooh, I'm going to say Philly. I think that's like 85% to do with Ilsinho, who is easily my favorite player to watch MLS. He's just like in full video game mode at all times. And I think Philly has played really proactively this year, pressing, hitting on the counter. They're lovely, like combining to midfield, that sort of stuff. So I've loved watching Philly. San Jose might be a sleeper pick. Actually, it's probably not even a sleeper pick at this point. I mean, I think they've sort of like kind of lit the league on fire when it comes to expectations, like what was expected out of them. San Jose, NYCFC, I've liked watching a lot. I mean, LAFC is the obvious answer, mm-hmm. Man. They're just like, it's just like they might be the best team in MLS history. Obviously enjoyable to watch. That's pretty much it, man. So, I watch every LA Galaxy game just because I gawk at Zlatan like everybody else does, But they haven't been particularly fun to watch. I guess they've had some interesting ones, but
If it's Zlatan versus Ilsinho, do you know who you're going to be rooting for?
I think Ilsinho makes mincemeat out of Zlatan. I mean, I think Ilsinho embarrasses Zlatan. The only way that doesn't happen is if Zlatan just resorts to physical violence.
He would never do that. That's not his style at all.
I know. I might catch some flack for saying it, but I'll choose to watch Ilsinho over Zlatan any day of the week.
And are there two teams? Is there any combination of teams that you would most like to see in MLS Cup final? Because right now it feels like it's going to be Philly or Atlanta playing one of the LAs, and I'm not sure I would have any problems with that. But you tend to watch the league, or you certainly watch the league more than I do. So I'm wondering if there's like a matchup that you would particularly enjoy.
Like my fantasy matchup, from like a Schadenfreude perspective, is definitely LAFC. No, it would be Seattle NYCFC at Yankee Stadium. So I want like an MLS Cup in a baseball stadium. I think that is like I'm like physically excited by that, Taylor. Like, if I had to pick just like the best matchup, probably LAFC. Maybe LAFC Philly or LAFC Atlanta, one of the two. Yeah.
I have seen people suggesting that there's an outside chance that NYCFC could end up hosting it, and that would be both hilarious and terrible all at once. I do not want to watch that camera angle.
It's not really it is an outside chance in a way, but it's also not, and that the only team that has a better record than them is LA.
True.
So if LAFC get eliminated and New York made the final, it's going to be there. So all of my fingers are crossed completely.
All right, so we'll see if that happens. If that happens, we'll definitely have you back on. My final question for you, I wanted to get to. Maradona is not my favorite player. I think probably Cruyff is up there for me, but I have been intrigued by the Maradona documentary. I think you got to see it already, so I'm wondering how it is.
Oh, it's fantastic. I didn't realize. I'd say 85 to 90% of it centers around his time at Napoli and Serie A. So I want to say like 84, 85 to 91. And it's incredible. I didn't really realize he was owned by the mob, essentially. So
I didn't know that either.
It really dives deep into his how crazy his time was there, and they interviewed everybody aside from I didn't realize that Maradona was part of the documentary. They got quite a bit from him, and they got all of his old teammates, coaches, the owner of Napoli, his ex-wife, the women that he cheated on his ex-wife with, his children. It is fantastic. It's also done in a way where they never show the interview subjects, and you just hear their voices, which I also sort of love. It's the movie's done entirely with archival footage, and it is next level, man. That's a must watch. I think it comes out October 1st on HBO or something. So that's one that you guys definitely have to catch.
All right, I am in for that one. I enjoyed getting to hang out with you this weekend and watching you go partial to full Mingo. And thank you very much, Pablo, for taking the time to chat today. Hopefully we can have you back on again in the near future.
Anytime, man. Thanks.